morning, parents. Hi, welcome. It's Petra from Victim to Hero. I hope you can hear me okay. Let me know you can actually hear me. Today, we have a special guest with us on this event, Attorney Ashish Joshi. And he's a specialist when it comes to high conflict litigation cases, especially parental alienation. And Ashish has published a lot of articles. If you guys haven't seen it, please check it out on his website or follow him on social media. And he also has a book that's called Litigating Parental Alienation, Evaluating and Presenting an Effective Case in Court. And this was published by the Family Court section of the American Bar Association. Hi, Ashish. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hello, Petra.
Thank you. And parents, please help us share this so that more people can see this. One of the very important aspect of parental alienation, especially for you as an alienated parent, is that the struggle that you're facing when you're dealing with anything out there, whether it's in the family court or when it's dealing with the situation with the public, with the school system, with the alienators, with your children. And a lot of it has to do with the lack of awareness. And then on top of that, we have the proliferation of misinformation and disinformation regarding parental alienation. And this is why we're having this event today, because we wanted to clarify the information and also give you the tools that you need, the awareness and the knowledge that you really need in order to deal with this situation. So before we actually go into talking about the misinformation, let's talk about what is parental alienation. What is the status of the scientific study, about this field? What is it? So Ashish, would you please comment on this?
Sure. Parental alienation has been defined by many experts in many different ways. But for the purposes of the family court, when parental alienation is discussed inside a courtroom, you are usually referring to a phenomenon, a state of affairs in a family dynamic where a child has rejected the parent because of the alienating behaviors that have been demonstrated by the favored parent. So in other words, there are no assumptions that just because a child is rejecting a parent, it's a case of parental alienation. You need to demonstrate evidence of alienating behaviors present in a case and how those behaviors have affected the child or children, as the case may be, resulting into the family dynamic that people call alienation.
Right. So it's not a blanket thing. The moment a child rejects a parent, it's not a blanket thing where you go, okay, that means parental alienation. It has to be proven, and there is a framework to determine parental alienation, right? Could we please sort of cover the sort of basic, you did mention about the behaviors and the impact on children. There's this sort of well-accepted, well-established five-factor model about parental alienation, right? So could we please just cover maybe some basic of that?
Sure. So let me unpack that, Petra, because you just made a great point about it being well accepted. And that is true. You see court decisions from all across the country in United States which discuss parental alienation. And the court decisions clearly tell us that the courts have considered the phenomenon of alienation. They have allowed expert testimony on the issue of parental alienation. Where they have found evidence of alienation, they have intervened and provided the necessary relief. And you see this going on a day-to-day basis all around the country and internationally. But nevertheless, there is a group of vocal critics that keep on talking about how the courts don't accept alienation. And there's this propaganda of misinformation out there, which says that it's a controversial theory, it's a disputed theory, the courts are not unanimous in accepting this, it's junk science and whatnot. And that is a smokescreen. Not only does it take away the precious time that a parent has to get the proper intervention from the court, but it ends up causing a lot of effort, a lot of money, and a lot of time to debunk this misinformation. And the courts get drawn into needless litigation, trying to go through the science and research and whether theory has scientific underpinning and whatnot. And by the time you ultimately come to the real issue, which is the behaviors of the alienating parent and how they affect the child and the child's relationship with the other parent, is often months, if not years, have gone by. And the window that you have of the intervention is fast shutting down. And that's the problem in these cases.
Right, and we're talking about a child that is growing, and everything that's going on with this child's life, and the child's quickly growing out of the system, because as a child getting closer to the teenager years, the courts start to kind of feel like, oh, it's too late to do something, which is really frustrating.
Right.
By the way, I wanted to acknowledge, people in the chat room. I saw Predak, hi, nice to see you. Kathleen, thank you. Claudia, hi, thank you so much. Rael, Kim, Via, Laz, thank you so much, you guys. Jane, Crystal, Kim, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to read all the names, but please, thank you so much. And do let us know if you have questions. We're going to try our best to pick up. I see people really watching it from all around the world, thank you so much. So yeah, there's people that said, parental alienation is really complicated because there's false documentation, police reports, not being able to see your child for months, going back and forth to court. And that's exactly what Ashish just mentioned. It sometimes it takes years, and some parents, there's someone here said, 24 years still PTSD. It's crazy situation that parents have to deal with, and the damage on the children because of all this. And then, so not only the alienators, the abuser is attacking you, behind them in the public, there's these groups that spread this propaganda, the misinformation that's supporting the abusers. It's crazy. Yeah, so thank you so much. So now there's a lot of research out there that is very clearly shows that parental alienation is problematic, it's child abuse. So let's talk about those.
Sure. So if we look at the expanding body of research on parental alienation, and we simply focus in the past 5 to 7 years, okay, let's say since 2016 onwards, we see a clear trend in peer-reviewed research published in scientific journals that tell us that PA scholarship is meeting the criteria of a mature field in the scientific study, which tells us three things. One, we have an expanding body of literature on parental alienation from all over the world, not just the United States, but from all over the world in many different languages, not just English. Second, we have a shift towards the quantitative studies of parental alienation. And third, we have a growing body of research that tests the theory-generated hypothesis. And together, these three things tell us that this is a solid science. There's significant scientific underpinning underlying the theory of alienation. And the research continues to come to us day in and day out.
Right. So I'm sharing on the screen a journal publication, an academic paper that was published on the scientific status of parental alienation. And so you guys can find this paper, and if you wanted to get a copy and you have trouble getting it, let me know and I will try to help you guys get a copy of this. So it's on the screen. You can see it's called Developmental Psychology and the Scientific Status of Parental Alienation. Now, this paper was published in a journal by the American Psychological Association. So the APA published this. This is, a very credible body Association, and in a journal that is highly rated. It's called the Developmental Psychology. It's very, very important journal in the field of psychology. It's a very important, like well-recognized paper in the scientific field. So if you look at just the abstract here, and if, like I said, if you want a copy of the paper, let me know. And Ashish just point out those three aspects of why this is proven that parental alienation is a well-established field that is well recognized, is credible. So it's very important. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to this, Ashish.
Sure, Petra. You made several good points there. Number one, this is a paper that was peer-reviewed. Number two, after the peer review was done, it was published in one of the most prestigious journals in the world, which has been published by the American Psychological Association. And number three, the paper is an excellent paper that talks about the qualitative studies on alienation and the shift towards the quantitative studies on parental alienation as the time goes by. It also talks about the research that we have, which we inherited. I'm using the word we in a loose terms, meaning legal professionals, mental health professionals, scientists, courts, everyone. The research on PA, which we inherited 2 decades ago, and where we stand today in terms of the current research. What are the metrics involved? What are some of the methodologies that are in place for doing this research? Where do we stand in terms of cutting-edge research on alienation? And it's pretty damn impressive what this paper conveys to us. Any attorney or any guardian ad litem, any forensic expert who works with the family court and the family court arena dealing with alienation cases simply cannot afford to not read this paper. You have to read this. And it's so important because it completely debunks several claims that vocal critics against PA keep on making about the theory being controversial, the theory being non-scientific, having no empirical support. And it's very essential to debunk these claims early on. The number one mistake that I keep on seeing in the family courts on issue of alienation and the underlying scientific support is that lawyers somehow shy away from that fight. They either tell the court that, well, you can just give whatever weight you feel appropriate, judge, let's not get into it. Or they choose to stay away from an evidentiary hearing or a trial where you have to present evidence and keep on making this deals in the hallways about therapy and reunification and some parenting time and supervised time. And that takes it away from a judicial finding of alienation. There is no need to be afraid of that controversy or that criticism that parental alienation somehow doesn't have scientific underpinning. It absolutely does. And if you study the court decisions from around the country carefully and you read the research, it's not that difficult to show in the courtroom as to why the theory is absolutely valid and reliable and does have underpinnings of science.
Thank you. Thank you. I do see in the chat room, Joseph, Patty, Maura, like a lot of people wanted to get a copy. So for sure, just leave a comment. We'll let you know. You don't have to put your email address in the public. We'll get the paper to you. Don't worry about that. Thank you so much. And let us know any questions that you may have. Thank you so much, Ashish. That is so important. I think one of the biggest part about being an alienated parent is the fear you're being bullied. Basically, you're being abused, and then on top of that, this fear is preventing you from truly having the power to go after the alienator to protect your children. And so if you feel like, oh, there's no scientific, because of this, like you mentioned the word smoke screen, right? Because of this misinformation that you feel like, oh, I can't really go out there and fight for my children, then you lose before you even have a case in court, before you even have a chance. And then if your lawyers, the professional that are a part of your team, mental health professional or your lawyers, also in that camp where they follow the misinformation, then it make it worse. That's why it's so important for you to be aware and to have the tools in your hand, show them this sort of document, being aware of this kind of information. It's so important for you to know that you have the power, you have the right to go after the alienators, to get your children back and to protect your children. So there's
let me add something to that, Petra, and that's a great point. Lawyers typically are not intelligent consumers of science, you know. And by that I mean, for example, my background is in economics and finance. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I have had to spend several days and hours and weeks and months and years learning about this. And one way to do it is to reach out to professionals who have published in peer-reviewed research articles, who have written in scientific journals. And we have plenty of them. We have great people like Dr. William Burnett, Dr. Jennifer Harman, Dr. Richard Warshak, Dr. Demosthenes Lorandos, Dr. Amy Baker, and several others. You read their works and you join some good organizations such as Parental Alienation Study Group. Of course, I'm biased about it because I've been a longtime member and a director on the board. But there's a listserv, and that gets you and puts you in touch with all these professionals. And if you read their works, especially the current works, you can follow the science. You can understand where the data leads you to. And if you really don't understand some of the studies or methodologies that are used in these papers, you can reach out to them. And they've been incredibly generous with their time in breaking it down to me and explaining it to me, which is very important for me because it allows me to explain it to a judge, a family court judge, a fellow lawyer, a fellow legal professional who might be equally in dark about the science out there. So you have to know it backwards and forwards in order to explain it to a judge and explain it in a convincing manner and break it down to them. So you have to ask questions. If you keep on looking at social media postings, and if you keep on looking at the internet out there, and you're looking at non-scientific, non-peer-reviewed papers, you are going to be misguided for sure.
Right. And you mentioned the thing about, the lack of awareness, and sometimes even judges are not aware of this. Those are really individual cases, but as a community, as a field, for example, we recently, this is like nearly more than half of years ago, right? Where we have a public statement that was released by the AFCC and the NCJ-FCJ, which is the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges and the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts. These are the two key organizations that representing all the people involved in the family courts, the judges, the lawyer, and all that. And this statement actually recognizing parental alienating behaviors and how the need for ongoing training for other people, other professional involved. As far as the field concerned, is well established and well recognized that parental alienation is a problem, and it is a real problem out there. So, but you do run into judges and professionals who are not educated, lack of awareness and things like that. So if you do run into those situations, be aware that that's not a widespread thing. Is not due to the lack of scientific or lack of recognition publicly for the problem. It's more of their individual lack of awareness. Right.
I see the problem in a slightly different perspective. Can I tell you why?
Please, yeah.
Most parents or most litigants, when they seem to believe that a particular judge doesn't seem to believe in parental alienation, it's not the information they've got from the judge directly. I have yet to see a case where a judge proclaims from the bench that says, I don't believe in parental alienation. You know, I don't believe that there's anything such as parental alienation or that it exists. I have never seen a judge do that. Now, a judge may express skepticism towards the theory of parental alienation. A judge may express some doubt as to, well, I don't know what are the peer-reviewed studies or what is the empirical support or where things stand now in terms of latest science. Or even the judge may express some doubt as to whether alienation is present in a particular case because of allegations of abuse, domestic violence, and whatnot. But the bigger issue is the perception of many lawyers. And it is the lawyers who tell the clients that so-and-so judge or our judge is not a big fan of parental alienation. Now, that may or may not be true. That may be the assumption of that particular lawyer. That may be the underlying fear that the lawyer has, who may not know how to litigate a case of alienation. That may be an off-the-hand comment made by a judge in a completely different situation. We don't know. But this perception that judges don't understand or don't believe in alienation is absolutely belied by the thousands and thousands of decisions we have from all across the country where they have grappled with alienation, made judicial fact findings on alienation, and provided the necessary intervention when they have found evidence of alienation.
Right. I this is something that I struggle a lot with, and I wonder if you have any thought on that, is why is there such a widespread misinformation? What motivate these people that push for this misinformation?
That's a great question. I don't have an answer to that. I can take some intelligent guesses if you want.
Yeah, please.
Um, I think much of it is a product of bias. Every human being has a bias. There's a lot of confirmatory bias out there. What used to be the case is that the advocates of domestic violence were somehow led to believe that if they accept, acknowledge, or endorse the theory of parental alienation, somehow they would be hurting their cause and they would be hurting the women who have been subjected to domestic violence and are victims of domestic violence. It was somehow thought that PA is anti-DV. I don't know where the idea came from, but I've seen that mentioned several times. And I've seen that argument play out in courts as well. But there are court decisions which talk about parental alienation being blind to gender, that women have been affected as alienated parents as well, and men have been alienated from their children as well. But the theory still has some traction among certain critics, and they keep on talking about abusive men somehow misusing the theory of parental alienation in courts to hide their abusive behavior and instead accuse the victims of domestic violence. You don't see this play out in appellate or trial records. I haven't seen a case where a judge ignored all evidence of abuse or all evidence of domestic violence and somehow just assumed that it must be a case of alienation. Yes, you do see cases where allegations of domestic violence or allegations of abuse were not believed. And that's for a fact finder. It's for a judicial fact finder or a clinical fact finder in the case of an evaluation to decide whether a particular allegation has merit. And that's what our adversarial system is based upon. But to say that every case of alienation is a bogus case somehow, only hiding the abusive behavior of the rejected parent, is just absurd. So confirmatory bias plays a big role. The second criteria is either ignorance or willful blindness towards the cutting edge research that keeps on coming towards us. We have papers published in peer-reviewed journals published by American Psychological Association. published by American Psychiatric Association, child and adolescent psychiatry journals, lots of them. And they talk about the good data, they talk about current state of the research, but these publications are not well known. And practitioners, particularly lawyers, don't keep up with the scientific publications. Sometimes they're not even aware of it unless they make an active effort to go and seek out this scientific sources. And if the lawyers are not aware of it, the judges it would be hard for the judges to be aware of it, because the lawyer is tasked with the uh, task of educating the court and putting before the judge the best possible research out there.
Right. Yeah, and on top of that, the judges have talking about caseloads. They have so much going on. It's
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, if you walk into a family court in any major metropolitan area, Detroit, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, you can just see the tremendous backlog that the family courts face, the shortage of judges, the time that they have to adjudicate each and every case. And sometimes the judges appoint professionals like such as minors counsel or guardian ad litem to help them deal with these cases, who can make good recommendations to the court as to what should be done. So then we are relying upon this secondary quasi judges, so to speak, who is going to investigate a case and make findings and recommend to the court as to what should be done. Referees, magistrates, call them what you will. So it's important for the lawyer representing the targeted parent to not only learn the current research, study it, but then effectively put it before the trier of fact, whether it's a judge or a GL or a magistrate.
right, right. I wanted to point out this really important paper that was published again in a journal by the American Psychological Association that actually Ashish mentioned some of the key factors earlier about, the court doesn't just immediately acknowledge that a case is parental alienation without looking at all the facts involved and the allegation of abuse and things like that. So this paper here is called Allegations of Family Violence in Court, How Parental Alienation Affects Judicial Outcomes. This is a very, very important publication out there. Again, if you guys need a copy of this, let us know. But it's the research is out there, the data is out there, the information is out there. So it's so important for you guys to be aware of this and don't just kind of like assume that there's no information or anything like that. You have the tools, you have the power. So be aware of that. Don't let
Can I add something, Petra? Yeah, and this goes back to what you were talking about. Why don't people get anywhere in court? Many a times judges are not able to give you the relief that you want, whether it's change of custody, it's more parenting time, or mental health intervention, such as a proper reunification program, or a temporary separation of the child from the alienating parent. These reliefs, these prayers that you are asking from the court, they are pretty substantive reliefs. They require a fact-finding mission, because the law requires due process. For a judge to understand and accept that there's alienation taking place requires the judge to hold an evidentiary hearing or a trial. The parent who is complaining of alienation, who is telling the court that I have been alienated from my child by the other parent, is required to demonstrate and give evidence, not just accusations, not just filing motions or writing letters or things like that, but actually testifying in court and presenting evidence of alienation, either by expert testimony or otherwise. And after this evidentiary hearing, the court can take the steps necessary. But what frequently happens is that the lawyers file some preliminary papers, such as motions. The other side files their own motion, and there is some sort of a stopgap solution put in place without an evidentiary hearing. And that's what derails these cases, because people shy away from actual evidentiary hearing or trial. But without that, you cannot have a judicial fact finding.
Right, right. Um, I noticed a comment in the chat room that I do want to address because this is kind of added into the misinformation and out there. Someone mentioned that Maya has since then replied to Hammond's response. I wanted to clarify this. Like, if you are within the scientific community, you will understand that if there's a paper published in a scientific journal, especially in a credible journal by the American Psychological Association, the appropriate process for responding, for you to be your response to be recognized, is for you to respond to that journal that was published, because that paper, not all the paper and not all the journals are equal. Some of them are actually very iffy. So some are well recognized, and so a credible journal like the one where this paper that we just talked about was published, the appropriate process for the scientific community is to respond to that particular journal regarding this paper. Now, there has never been a response to that journal. Now, if you respond in the social media, I mean, this is a whole another thing. Or if you respond in some junk journal out there, yeah, you can get your stuff out there in a lot of junk places, but you don't read the TMZ, for example, for right. So that's my point. So,
Yeah.
just because you see a response somewhere, it doesn't mean that it's the appropriate response and or the response that you should take into consideration. Now, if there was a proper response that is recognized and peer reviewed, it would have been in the same journal, and we do not have a response to this paper on that. So as far as response concerned, no, there's no response.
Can
Okay.
I would like to add three things to what you just mentioned. First of all, you are absolutely right. The process of writing a rebuttal in a scientific journal to a scientific article, there's a particular process for it. And it's one thing if the American Psychological Association would have published Joan Myers' so-called rebuttal in the very same journal that they published the article by doctors Harmon and Lorandos. They did not do so. That's quite telling. That rebuttal, if there was one, was never published in the APA's journal. Second, we are talking about apples and oranges. What they are saying is that they seem to believe in their review of cases, which no one knows about exactly which cases, that some judges ignored evidence of abuse or allegations of abuse and instead found parental alienation. Now, how is that opinion helpful to a judge who is wrestling with allegations of alienation in his or her particular case? Because that judge needs to focus on the evidence of that case. And when you argue that the whole theory is bogus and is junk science because some judges completely were bamboozled by people complaining of alienation when no alienation was taking place, that's neither here nor there. You have to talk about your case and the facts involved in your case about it. And thirdly, I know in cases that I have litigated before trial judges around the country, and I have taught at judicial colleges as well and bar associations, how difficult it is for a trial judge to get to the bottom of a case involving alienation, how time-consuming exercise it is, and how much effort it requires. So to assume that all these judges across the country who found alienation and alienating behaviors where alienators were held accountable somehow were bamboozled by ultra smart abusive men who chose to misuse the theory of alienation just boggles my mind. It makes
Right.
no sense whatsoever.
Exactly. And for some reason, it's pretty widespread.
It is. And you know what tells me that this is a complete propaganda is because these groups who claim to be advocates for women or survivors of domestic violence, they actually go out and tell women who complain of alienation that don't use the term parental alienation. Rather, go and use the term domestic violence by proxy. Now, if you dig deeper, the behaviors that you are talking about and behaviors you're complaining about are the same behaviors, whether you call it parental alienation, restrictive gatekeeping, domestic violence by proxy, or otherwise. But they choose to make this war on labels rather than looking at the underlying behaviors.
I think it is a distraction to
It is
be
a
argued.
distraction.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
to argue on labeling. Like, let's focus on the problem. Let's focus on fixing the problem and rescuing these children. And some parents actually, I think they get misguided because they see this debate over naming convention, that they think that, oh, can we just go and accept a different name and hopefully somehow that will get accepted. That's not the truth at all. If you look at Cadence law, for example, it is a very very problematic law that was somehow passed in at the federal level. They don't even use the term parental alienation at all. They actually just going out there and going against alienated parents and alienated children without using the term. So you can go and debate about the labeling. These groups, this advocate claiming to be advocate groups, are actually going out there and going against the alienated children and parents themselves without it has nothing to do with the labeling. They themselves are against this whole idea, and they're out there and somehow protecting the abusers. So just because you're accepting a different name, like that whole debate is really a distraction.
And I'm encouraged by the fact that more and more judges are seeing this for what it is, a war on ideology. For example, there was a great decision that came out just last week from Nebraska, and the Nebraska court acknowledged, endorsed parental alienation, the behaviors that were classified as alienating behaviors, provided the proper intervention that was needed, they did everything without using the word or term parental alienation. They chose to call it restrictive gatekeeping. They chose to call it a different term. But in the end, these were the same behaviors that we call alienating behaviors. And the court found them to be harmful.
Right, exactly. Because you can call whatever it is, it doesn't matter. The phenomena is still the same. The problem is still the same. So let's just forget the discussion on the name. Can we just focus on this thing that we need to fix, right? By the way, talking about that, I do wanted to share that I am going to be heading to Athens in May and to the ICSB conference. Are you going, Ashish?
No, I will be very
Oh.
much in a trial court in May.
Oh,
trying to
I'm
fix.
sorry. I was hoping to see you there. But anyway, for parents, even if you can't go there, you can also sign up to watch it live.
It's a wonderful conference.
Right. It's a great conference, and then that's why I'm also gonna hope to talk about a lot of these issues and fighting the misinformation and the public awareness and things like that. So anyway, the information out there for you guys to look up is athens-2023.org. So talking about the widespread misinformation, I do wanted to share this paper that Ashish and I talk about. Yeah, this paper by Dr. William Burnett that you mentioned earlier. Okay, do you want to comment on this? Yeah.
Sure. This is one of the papers that came out in 2022, which was highly regarded and sought after in terms of debunking of rumors. And there's a few things. A peer-reviewed paper published in a scholarly journal, Behavioral Sciences and the Law. And the authors, Doctors Burnett and Zhu, I'm not sure how the last name is pronounced. I think it's Zhu, but I could be mistaken. They make a really interesting point here. And they talk about scholarly rumors and how it takes place. And they explain that basically we are talking about a small group of people, the critics of parental alienation, who first misquote the research on parental alienation. And then they go on and quote each another, and it just keeps on spiraling after that. So to give you an example, someone who is a critic of parental alienation theory writes a paper which is published in a non-scientific journal. And in that paper, that person, let's call her Jane Doe, for example. Jane Doe writes that the theory of parental alienation assumes that just because the child has rejected a parent, it must be a case of alienation. No legitimate proponent of parental alienation theory has ever said that. But this person creates a straw man argument, misquotes the research, and then in turn, Jane Doe is quoted by John Doe and Jane Doe 2 and Jane Doe 3 in different non-scientific publications. And before you know, you have 50, 100, 200 articles all citing each other and misquoting each other. And this is a great example of the figure in that scientific article we mentioned about the what I call the usual suspects. And this shows the prevalence of misinformation. And the node or the circle of the size indicates the out degree score. It's very important for any practitioner who deals with alienation in family courts to read this paper. And more importantly, read the appendix, the 94 examples of misinformation that the authors provide, together with the citation and the source, why that's misinformation and how to show it to a family judge if you deal with this. Because you will. If you litigate cases involving alienation, at some point in time, you will be faced with this propaganda of misinformation. And you have to demonstrate to the family court why this is misinformation and should not be relied on.
Right.
You know, lawyers, for example, if you go to a court and cite a case that you know has been overruled, that you know is no longer good law, you can be held accountable and you can be sanctioned for doing that. Because as an officer of the court, you are required to be candid towards the tribunal. You have to be diligent, you have to be honest, and you have to be competent. But when lawyers cite social research or scientific research, they are not held accountable on equal terms, because they can claim ignorance, they can claim willful blindness, they can say, well, Judge, I don't know, my expert just gave me these articles. Well, you have to read them. If your expert's giving you bad science, and if your expert is giving you bad dated science, which was prevalent 20, 30 years ago, and you are being willfully blind to the current science coming out on the theory of PA, you need to be held accountable for that.
Right.
And if you look at this diagram, Petra, you can see the common suspects here who keep on using the same propaganda. If you look at the right-hand side towards the extreme right, you see the current research out there, sources in 2022, which keep on citing the old dated science, which is no longer in place. I wouldn't even call it science, I'd call it propaganda, misinformation. But it's the same old circle. This is not, there's no new misinformation coming out. It's the same old misinformation dating back to attacks on Richard Gardner, dating back to the unwarranted assumptions about parental alienation, which were never made by legitimate scientists or people who were proponents of parental alienation theory. But they keep on being recycled in legal journals, in books, in non-scientific articles, and they keep on being recycled in courtrooms by being included in motion papers.
Right. Yeah. So for parents, I just wanted to point out what Ashish is talking about. If you look at this, you will see that there's a lot of publication today, junk publications, and it seemed to the public and seems to unaware people that there's a lot of publication, but yet they all citing to these three or four. There's only 4 paper here. So when you started with on the wrong foot, you started with bad input, you're gonna end up with this mass of output that are all junky. And so it's very important to recognize, even though you hear, it's kind of like empty can that is just echoing louder. So you have a lot of empty cans that just echoing these 3 or 4 pieces of bad science or bad propaganda, misinformation. Now you have this mass of publications here, but if you go and look at this paper, you will see that they are accurately tracking this and it's showing you the problem that you are facing. That's why there's this widespread misinformation out there. But really, at the end of the day, if you track back, it's because it's all originated from these few bad ones. And then it become a widespread thing. It's sort of like, the bad apple that spoiled the whole batch, basically.
What is interesting is there is not one peer-reviewed paper published that tells us that parental alienation doesn't exist. Not one. Even the detractors of the theory of parental alienation, when they complain about not having enough empirical support or somehow the theory being controversial, freely concede that yes, alienation does happen. It is possible to alienate the children from the healthy, loving parent. And there are things like alienating behaviors. But then they gloss over it and talk about the controversy and Richard Gardner and how abuse is ignored and whatnot. And that's a job of the family court judge to decide in each case as to whether the child's rejection of the parent is justified or not.
Right.
And for that, in order to get the intervention, in order for the judge to make the determination, a judge doesn't need to waste time and deal with all the scientific theories or opinions of all these people about whether alienation is real, existent, or not. I mean, that's why I loved it when the Ontario Court of Appeals back in 2019, I think, came out with an opinion saying, we hereby take judicial notice that the phenomenon of parental alienation is real. It does exist, and when it exists, it can cause irreparable harm to the child and the relationship the child has with the parent. I mean, how great was that? That the panel of judges come out and say, enough already, we are not going to waste time, precious time that the kid needs to repair the relationship, into debating whether this is a real thing or not. We know it's real because we are looking at these behaviors day in and day out.
I'm sorry, I don't have a copy of it on hand, but if you don't mind, could you please send it to me and I'll make sure I share it with parents later. That's an amazing.
I'll be happy to do so. And since you mentioned the Athens conference, you will meet Brian Ludmer, their a Canadian attorney. And Brian has been very instrumental in getting some good law out of Canada. So here's a plug for Brian and his wonderful work in the area of parental alienation.
Yeah, Brian's amazing. And for parents in Canada, you can look up, we have done several interviews with Brian. So if you go into our Victim to Hero Facebook page on the videos tab, you can actually search for his name, Brian Ludmer, and you can get a lot of information. We even talk about case law in Canada and what the situation and how to fight and all that kind of things. For fighting in the US, we have multiple interviews with Ashish. Also, if you go into the videos tab of Victim to Hero Facebook page, you can also search for his name and find other videos, other interviews that we did in the past where Ashish went into very specific information about how to fight for your cases and things like that. And we also interview other attorneys that have successfully fought cases in parental alienation. So yeah, definitely search for those information. So one of the big things, and you pointed out something so important, is that there's not one peer review paper. So, in the scientific community, officially, we saw it, but yet there's this widespread misinformation, and a lot of it is out in the social media. So, for example, recently there's an article by Hannah Dreyfus. I hope that I pronounced her last name correctly, on ProPublica. Do you want to comment on that?
That's a Utah case, right? Yeah, I remember reading the article. Of course, I'm not involved in the case, and I don't have any fact-specific knowledge of that case. But it's always problematic, in my opinion, when You have people attacking judicial opinions or judicial findings on social media because you don't know what it takes for a judge to make a finding of alienation. And transcripts, court filings, forensic reports, there when it involves minor children are often sealed. And it's very easy to attack a judge on the social media without taking the trouble as to why that judge was persuaded that alienation exists in a particular case. I'll give you another example. I'll send you that article. It was written by another judge from Michigan. And the title of that article is Parental Alienation is One Thing, but what are you going to do when they come after you? And in this article, that judge talks about his struggles with a case involving severe parental alienation, where the alienating parent refused to follow the court orders, basically kidnapped the children across the state lines, was thereafter found and was brought back into the state, orchestrated false child protective services investigations by making false accusations. And throughout the nightmare that the case became, and when the judge tried to do the right thing and protect the children, how he was attacked by this alienating parent outside the courts, in the media, in the social media circus and whatnot, false allegations. And it tells you the level of vitriol sometimes that is present in these cases. And when alienating parents feel that they are going to be held accountable and the court's going to hold them accountable, lashing out on social media is nothing but bullying, in my opinion.
It's absolutely bullying.
And yes, and I'm talking about the general perspective of social media postings about cases. I mean, not one particular case. And I certainly don't know what happened in the Utah case and why that judge was persuaded by whatever evidence was in front of that judge to make a finding of alienation. But it's also important to note a couple of other things that was present in that article. It made some comments about turning points for families. Now, to my knowledge, there are only two programs in the United States that have success data outcome studies published in peer-reviewed journals. One is Turning Points for Families, and another is Building Bridges or Family Bridges, which was co-founded by Dr. Richard Warshak years ago. And the publication about the success outcome for these programs were published in peer-reviewed prestigious journals. There's a lot of misinformation out there about how the publishers or the authors of that article on Turning Points for Families were somehow paid or financially affiliated with Turning Points, and that's absolutely false. There's no data supporting that propaganda of misinformation. But if we take a step back, programs like Turning Points for Families and Building Bridges are meant for severe cases of parental alienation. Not every case of alienation needs a specialized reunification program or 405 days, a no contact period between the alienating parent and the child, all the safeguards in place. And Dr. Warshak has written about it, so has many other scholars, about how alienation is a spectrum. And a mild case of alienation might be treated with psychoeducational programs for the parents. A moderate case of alienation might require multimodal family intervention and different kind of counseling, therapy, and all that. Whereas a severe case might require different intervention measures. But if a judge has ordered severe intervention, you would pause and think about what persuaded that judge. And when you look at the social media criticism or criticism on online media and other articles, it's very hard to determine what happened, because obviously the judges are not going to fight back and reply to this criticism online. The guardian ad litem or the court involved professionals are not going to lash out because they can't talk about revealing details about minor children and clinical issues on online media. So it creates a perfect storm where people jump on the bandwagon and start criticizing the court and the professionals, and the professionals can't really answer back any of their criticism. And Petra, this is the reason why the American Bar Association came out with a task force. And this task force was put together to respond against the unjust and unfair attacks on the judiciary. And every state in response has created some sort of mechanism or a task force to help the judges and legal professionals deal with this unfair criticism of the judicial fact finding, which happens particularly where minor children or sensitive details regarding domestic violence, abuse, alienation might be involved. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing that was really troublesome to me is the spin that was put on parental alienation as a phenomenon. When you read the article in ProPublica, it appears that writer went to some lengths to talk about how parental alienation is a disputed and a theory, as if it has no scientific underpinning, and that's being willfully blind to the existing research. Peer-reviewed research in scientific journals that she had access to. She could have very well looked at it and talked about how parental alienation has significant scientific underpinning. But the article didn't come out in that fashion, and I don't know why about it. But it's clear that it's not a scientific article. It wasn't written by a scientist. And things like that, which I call anecdotal publications and talking about particular anecdotes or particular cases, they don't do anything to counter peer-reviewed studies or research published in scientific journals. But they have tremendous risk in derailing a case, because you might have a alienating parent's attorney come into the court and say, Your Honor, the program such as Turning Points or such as Family Bridges or some other program has been severely criticized, and look at this article published in whatever. And it's important at that point in time for the targeted parent's attorney or the guardian ad litem to make sure that the comparison is appropriate. We are comparing apples and apples, not apples and oranges. So to say that a study published by, let's say, Dr. Harmon in a scientific journal, which was peer-reviewed, is somehow countered by a social media article would be absurd. And the judge needs to understand that the limitations of an online article or an opinion piece or something that is not peer-reviewed, not scientific, and you can equate that with scientific publications.
Right. That is such an important point. And the same thing with what you mentioned earlier, which is judges and professionals, their hands are tied. They are not allowed to go into the social media and comment about cases. So they can't defend themselves in social media. And yet I'm not going to comment about this specifically, this paper, but in this article that we talk about in ProPublica, but in general, this whole community of misinformation advocates, they get to echo all this stuff in social media and make it sound as if this is something that's well recognized, and they're getting momentum on that. And meanwhile, the people that actually truly have the information are not allowed to comment in social media. So it gives the impression to the public that somehow there's some validity or to these social media messages. And unfortunately, the public are not well informed, so then it become a bigger problem than it should. So it's so important for you, the alienated parents, and really, any professionals out there in the field to become educated and recognized. And like you said, we're not comparing apple with oranges here. You can't do that. This is not the same. This is just some kind of social media piece versus scientific, this whole field of scientific study over 3 decades, thousands of papers. that looking at this field, and it's well established and it's well recognized by the community of judges and lawyers out there. So it's so important for you to recognize that you have the tools out there.
Right. And another thing that is striking to me is that these groups who complain about parental alienation and keep on saying that somehow it hurts women and is against domestic violence or whatnot, they choose to remain conveniently and willfully blind to cases that come from the court where men have been found to be alienators. There's a great case from the state of Tennessee, I believe in 2017, somewhere on there, a published opinion, I think McLean versus McLean. And in that case, you read the opinion from the Court of Appeals. And the Court of Appeals goes into detail as to the trial court's efforts in trying to save the child and the child's relationship with the mother, and the alienating behaviors of the father that were described in detail in that case. Text messaging with the child, telling the child how your mother doesn't love you, telling the child that your mother is mentally ill, and goes into incredible detail about all these alienating behaviors. And thereafter, the steps taken by the court to protect the child. Now, there are plenty of cases like this where fathers, men, have been found to be alienators. And the response by this group is not to say, well, what are you talking about? Alienation doesn't exist, it's junk science. No, the response in that situation is, don't use that term. Use the term domestic violence by proxy. That tells me that the complaint is about an ideology, not science. That tells me that labels matters more to you than actual children's lives and the relationship with the targeted parent.
Right. They ignore the substance of the matter and then arguing about the label. And as a previously alienated mother, I will tell you that this is not a gender issue. It happened to men, it happened to women, it happened to fathers, it happened to mothers. It's not a gender issue. But yet this group turn it into a gender issue based on ideology, and they just spread this information. Yeah, it's really unfortunate. And then I have the other thing I have a problem with the term domestic violence by proxy is that when you say domestic violence by proxy, it means that the violence is perpetrated through another person in the middle. So, the alienated parents is being harmed because the child is being used as a weapon against the alienated parent. But the violence also happened to the child directly. And the term domestic violence by proxy is basically ignoring the fact that the child is also a victim of violence and abuse here. And so I do have a problem with that term in that sense, not to mention many other problems with it.
Labels don't matter at the end of the day. In every case that I have been involved in, and I've been involved in many cases across the country and internationally, I can tell you that what convinced a family judge to provide the right intervention was the evidence of alienating behaviors and how those behaviors affected the child. And you can put whatever label you want on it. You could call it inappropriate parenting, pathogenic parenting, restrictive gatekeeping, adultification, parentification, parental alienation. It doesn't matter. When you have evidence of alienation and the effect of that evidence on the child's relationship, judges sit back and they take notice.
Right. It's really important for you to focus on. That's why I actually do say that there's, like we mentioned earlier on, about the 5-factor model framework. Even if you don't use the term parental alienation, it's very important for you to recognize a framework, because if you present your information in that structure, it doesn't matter if the person recognizes the label or not. You will recognize the problem. They will recognize the problem if you present it properly. And we do have, I do have a workbook on Amazon for you guys, for parents that are dealing with this, that based on the 5-factor model, so you can look that up. I think earlier there's a parent that asked about if you know of case law in California for parental alienation that could be helpful. So later if you have a chance that you could
Well,
send.
I would recommend that parent to go and get hold of this book, Parental Alienation, Science and Law, which came out in 2020, published by Charles C. Thomas. And the reason I like this book so much and I use it so often is Appendix B in this book. In Appendix B, you find cases involving parental alienation from the US courts in every state in the country. Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, all the California cases, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages long, Delaware, Michigan, you name it. So these are the cases where alienation, the issue of alienation was in front of the courts and the courts addressed it. The courts may not necessarily have found alienation, but the courts at least dealt with their argument. You could see a court making a finding of moderate to severe alienation and changing custody and issuing a no contact order and all of that. Or you could find a court dealing with the argument of alienation, but going forward and explaining why this is a case not involving alienation, which is equally important as a practitioner to know as to what was it that persuaded the court to make a finding or not making a finding of alienation.
Right. It's so important. So this is a book that Ashish just mentioned. It's called Parental Alienation, Science and Law. It's actually authored by, I think, 30 experts in the field and was edited by Dr. Lorandos and Dr. Burnett. So you can find that on Amazon and many other places. I also do want to share another important book by Ashish, which is this book here that I did mention earlier. Is it showing? Yes, I think it's not showing the whole screen. Give me a second. I'm so sorry. How does this? Yeah, for some reason it's not showing full
I
screen.
can see it, Petra. It's up on my screen.
Okay, yeah, but it's cutting off your name at the top and lost a bit at the bottom. But this is a book. It's litigating parental alienation, evaluating and presenting an effective case in court. So it's also a very important book, and I highly recommend parents to look that up, to check that out if you are going through litigation process.
Yeah, I believe I also include a list of those cases from all different jurisdictions at the very end of the book, if I remember. So that
Right.
might be helpful to some of the parents and lawyers out there.
Right. Thank you. So is there anything else that we should add before we go?
I think it's important for legal practitioners, attorneys, guardians ad litem, magistrates, referees. If you are involved in the family law arena and you deal with cases involving alienation, you have to keep abreast of the latest recent research in this field. And I'm not just talking about law reviews or legal articles. I'm talking about scientific articles. I'm talking about psychology, psychiatry, adolescent and child development behavior, and all of it. And it is absolutely critical for you to keep abreast of the new research so you can debunk and you can counter the misinformation that often comes in the courts, by whether it's by filing a motion, an argument by an expert. If you have to cross-examine an expert who tells the court that alienation is junk science or doesn't exist, or the whole theory is controversial and unreliable, you need to know your science to effectively cross-examine that expert.
Right.
And what's funny is it always gets me. From time to time, you have these experts on the stand who are telling the court about how alienation is really not reliable and there's a lot of controversy. And if you go through their own writing, their own journal articles, their own books, they concede and freely admit that alienation is real. It does exist. They themselves have made findings of alienation in some cases when they were retained by the alienating parent. And It's a phenomenal thing to destroy the credibility of those experts when they come in the court. So you have to know the science backwards and forwards.
Right. Yeah, it's really important. And then if you, but that's the challenge that I find though, is that it's so difficult for parents to find good representation out there. It's like it's the lack of awareness is so, it just seems so widespread and so common. We need to change that.
Yes, fortunately, there's more and more education out there. More and more bar associations around the country are holding continuing legal education programs for lawyers, for judges. Judicial conferences are inviting more and more published authors like Dr. Harmon, for example, to come and teach about parental alienation. So there is a growing awareness out there. Certainly, any judge in this day and age will knows and understand that alienating behaviors do exist. There was an opinion from New York some time ago where a judge made a comment in their opinion that anyone old enough to drink coffee knows that a child can be alienated by harmful behaviors. And more judges are shying away from this fight about science and whatnot. They want to talk about this case. They want to talk about this set of behaviors. They want to talk about this signs of alienation in the child and what can we do about it. And that's how I think it should be. Because at the end of the day, a judge is a fact finder. He or she has a mission to look at the evidence in front of them and determine whether there is a justifiable reason for the child to reject this parent or to resist contact with this parent, or whether that rejection is based because of the other parent's influence and bad behavior. That's it at the end of the day.
Right, right. So upcoming, I want to let parents know that on April 8th, we're gonna post information soon, but April 8th, we're gonna be holding an event, it's called Interference with Child Custody Awareness Day. And on that day, we're gonna talk about interference with child custody. And if you are familiar with, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are dealing with interference with child custody, meaning that it's a time that you're supposed to have your children based on the court order, and the other parents is withholding the child and preventing you from being able to have your child. And obviously, this is one of a big alienating behaviors. So this is, and it is a criminal matter. Actually, it's not just a civil matter. It's actually a criminal matter. It doesn't matter what state you are looking at, what jurisdiction you're looking at. You will find law that indicates that interference with child custody is actually a criminal matter. So we're going to be holding a very big event. It's probably several hours long. We're going to post information. And we're going to have different people coming on and share with you guys the information about it and how to deal with it. We're also going to talk about cases, their parents that successfully found their children be able to fight the situation, things like that. So keep an eye out. If you're not on our mailing list, please join our mailing list on our website at victimtohero.com. I know that we haven't sent out a lot of mails, but we will be sending information when it's critical. We have Parental Alienation Awareness Day coming up in April. So now is a good time if you wanted to reach out to your city, officials, the mayors and other places to ask for a recognition. So we have that information on our website on how to get a recognition for Parental Alienation Awareness Day. We encourage this sort of activities because it's empower you so that you don't always feel like you're a victim. You actually have the power in your hand, and anything that you do can help make changes. So there's things like that are coming up. Is there anything else that we should mention before we go?
I don't believe so, Petra. I think you hit all the important points here.
Thank you. I know that there's a lot more questions. Pradak was asking, is there Q&A? So I do know, so for example, okay, so last, do you have experience from using the term child psychological abuse in court when focusing on severe alienation and cut-off situation with children for several years? Does it make a difference? I do have an answer to that, but I think it's more a question more suitable for you.
Well, there is research out there that tells us about how severe cases of parental alienation involve child psychological abuse. And I think any expert will concede that if there is evidence of severe parental alienation, and the child happens to be rejecting a perfectly loving, healthy, normal parent because of alienating behaviors, that constitutes child psychological maltreatment.
Right. There's also, talking about publications, there's also a paper by Dr. Hammond and Dr. I'm so sorry. I
Even Dr.
forgot.
Crook.
Yes, Dr. Crook, Edward Crook. I apologize. Yeah, Dr. Crook and Dr. Hammond. They're actually going in depth about how parental alienation constitute child psychological abuse. So if you guys wanted that, also let me know. I'm happy to send that to you guys. And if you haven't seen it, look up in, again, the videos tab of Victim to Hero Facebook page, and you will find the interview that we did with Dr. Crook talking about this particular aspect of it. So yes, definitely it is a term that you could use. But again, like Ashish just emphasized over and over, worry less about labeling, focusing on what's going on with your case, provide evidence for your case, with all these kind of aspects, definitely point out the impact on your children and things like that is really important, but, worry less about the labeling. I do see a question from Rachel that asking, is there a way of fast tracking evidentiary hearing or trial? Because we need to minimize the damage to children, because obviously prolonged cases are really, really bad. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure about I'm not sure about that, because fast tracking cases involves the local jurisdiction's protocol and procedure. So what might be, for example, an option in the state of Illinois might not work in the state of California. Generally speaking, the decisions involving custody, child custody, do take precedence in terms of appeals, and there's a shorter track for that particular thing. But again, if it is a case of alienation, I think the first thing to determine would be, where does it stand in terms of severity of alienation? Is it mild, medium, or severe? That is not to say that if you have a case of mild alienation or mild alienating behaviors are present, you sit back and wait until it gets to a severe case of alienation, because you have an opportunity for early intervention, which is godsend. It's a remarkable opportunity to intervene early in a case involving alienation and stop that from being a pathological case of alienation. But judges have different dockets. They have different backlog. What might be feasible in one jurisdiction might be just totally impossible in another jurisdiction. But it's important for an attorney dealing with a case of moderate to severe alienation to frame that case as child protection or protecting a child from abuse, rather than putting it in the category of parenting time or custody battle. Because what you are trying to do is to protect the child. It involves child protection, and that's why it needs urgency. It's not about getting more parenting time. It's not about makeup time. It's not about custody. It's about child abuse. But again, not all cases of alienation rise to that level. And that's why it's important to understand, what case do you have to begin with?
Right, it's very specific case to cases. I do see a comment from someone that said, "Oh, while many family court judges are protecting the abuser because they are protecting the system and the money stream to the family court," I do want to comment on this now. I think it's very easy and I understand your frustration, especially if you are facing challenges in the family court and it just feels like the whole system is stacking against you. I do understand that, but it's so important for you, for parents out there and for anyone, to stay away from the position of negativity and venting and just complaining, because it doesn't empower you. You might have a particular situation in your case that is challenging. I'm not saying that it's easy at all, and I understand your frustration, but get out of that negativity and don't take this as, oh, your system is corrupted. Because when you say that, you hand over your power and just say, oh, this, I'm helpless here, I'm just a victim. Get out of that position, be the hero, and be in charge of your case, get educated, drive your case, so that be in the driver's seat. Because it start from there. Your lawyers is going to be as active as you are, because you can't hand it over to your lawyers and the professional involved in the case, and your court case is going to be driven by that. So if you just go, oh, the system is corrupted anyway, you're just going to throw your hands in the air and you're not going to do anything, then it's not going to help your situation. So I would definitely say that, I'm not saying that corruption doesn't happen. I'm just saying, let's just change your thinking, because the power of your mind is so important. So don't give your power away that way. But thank you so much, Ashish. I really appreciate your time. You've been amazing. And like I mentioned to parents, you guys can find our past interviews with Ashish, and you also can find on social media and other places where the links for his publication. He's really prolific when it comes to writing regarding parental alienation on many different aspects. He's very accessible. The same with many experts in this field. Actually, as a community, I've noticed as a community, the experts in the field are very, very open, and very generous with their time and things like that. So please reach out. You have resources out there. And parents, I know that I haven't addressed all the questions. I'm going to send the link of this video to Ashish, so that if he has time, he can take he can check out, and if there's questions that he can address, he will address that. And then I will see you guys again very soon. Thank you so much, and stay in the power. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra.
Thank you. Sorry.